Today we are discussing the Investigator under attack. You probably never thought when you signed up to conduct an investigation that you would be the one that's in the hot seat, or that someone might raise questions about your integrity or threaten your personal safety and well-being. And that can happen during an investigation. And it's really important for us to be prepared for that and take the right steps to respond. So today we're going to unpack that issue of being attacked as an investigator. We're going to provide you with some proactive tools that you can use to address that situation and steps that you can take to protect your physical and your mental well-being. My name is Dorian Prasad. I am the senior lawyer at Prasad Employment Law. We are a team of lawyers that specialize in conducting workplace investigations, and we help you to build healthy workplaces through investigations, training, and proactive advice. We are going to have a lot of time on the back end of this presentation for questions and answers. So if you do have a question, please do direct that to us using the chat function. And there's a Q&A tab within there. So please use that function to direct your questions to us. And we'll be going through each of those in turn on the back end of this presentation. Some of the examples of attacks that you've experienced might be something along the lines of, hey, are you even qualified to do this investigation? Or you might have a party ask about your experience and ask, how many investigations have you done? Do you have the experience to conduct this investigation? Others might come in and they might have questions about fairness, and they might point out, hey, look, you're part of HR, and does not mean that you represent the company. Am I actually going to get a fair shake here? So it's not unusual for those questions to be posed, at the beginning or at some point throughout the investigation process. And I know what that's like because I have been asked similar questions, and I actually had an experience a few months back where the next bullet point on the slide here, lying about how an interview had been conducted. I've experienced that. I had a situation where a witness, after our interview, ran to the director of HR and talked about how she had been mistreated and bullied during that interview process, and how she felt that she was being attacked, and nothing that she was saying was being believed. And just had this whole story and this whole narrative around how badly she had been treated during this investigation interview. Not surprisingly, the HR director had concerns and gave me a call to let me know the information that had been relayed to her. And I had the benefit of my experience, and I've been doing this work for 18 years, and I had the benefit of that process, and this is how we do things, and we just have a reputation of being consistent and doing a thorough and a good job. And I had the benefit of my investigation notes, and thankfully in this case I also had the benefit of a recording of that interview. So I explained the situation to the HR director, and I offered to have her review that investigation interview after our investigation was concluded, so that she could verify for herself that at all times this witness was being treated fairly. And while we did ask some tough questions, there was nothing unfair or aggressive in the way that we had conducted the interview. And in a matter-of-fact way, we believe that the witness was just lying about her experience. And as we traveled through that investigation in particular, we realized that there was a lot of politics at play. And that particular witness happened to be good friends with the responding party. And she thought if she could raise questions with the investigation, she might be able to upend that investigation and do her friend a favor. So there are all kinds of challenges as investigators that come our way, and we need to be able to deal with, sometimes on the fly, but there are other issues that come up that we can be prepared for. So we hope that through the course of this webinar that you'll become more comfortable both expecting and these issues, identifying these issues, and ultimately responding to them. It's helpful to, when you're under attack, to pause and take a step back and try to understand what's happening. And in that way, you're in a better position to unravel that and then provide the appropriate response. One of the reasons that a party might be upset is resentment over being involved in the process. You can think of the example of a manager who is doing her job and performance managing an employee, and then she's the respondent in a harassment complaint, and she has a lot of work on her desk, a lot of deliverables and things that she is accountable for, but here she is having to meet with the investigator and spend hours out of her day, or maybe multiple days, meeting with the investigator to go through this story and go through the allegations, even before the interviews, going through her records to prepare for these interviews. And that takes a lot of time and energy. And she feels like a victim because she was just doing her job, and here she is caught up in this process. So there's resentment over that. There's also fear about, even though as a manager, I'm pretty sure I didn't do anything wrong, I was just performance managing this employee, what's this going to do to my reputation? So these witnesses come into the interview with that resentment. You have other parties who are fearful. They are fearful of being exposed, and they're looking for reprisal. So they know they've done something wrong. They have been caught in their misconduct, and they do not want to be held accountable. So they are looking to attack the investigator, and let's raise questions about the investigator and the investigation process. And if possible, let's effect a reprisal against the investigator and others involved in order to shine the light on the investigator and take the spotlight off of their deeds. You may often get questions about fairness. We talked about fairness in terms of are you impartial as an investigator? By virtue of the fact that you work for HR does not mean that you're going to protect the company. So there's that aspect of it. There's also sometimes doubts about given the parties that are involved, maybe one party to the complaint is a senior manager. And so the person sitting there thinking, are you really going to accept my point of view, where my point of view contradicts with what a senior manager in this corporation is saying? So these are difficult questions and difficult issues that folks are wrestling with, and they're coming in and putting the investigator under pressure to maybe provide them with some assurance, or they're trying to put the investigator on his or her back foot to gain leverage in that process, hoping that you're going to be on your back foot. You're not going to be pressing them for the answers that you need. I think most of us have had the experience on the back end of an investigation where folks are simply just not happy with the outcome, and that goes for both the complainant and the respondent. Oftentimes, people come into these events with very strong feelings about what occurred, and they're very sure of their positions. And when your conclusions don't line up with that, they're quick to turn on you and claim that you did a bad job. So these are some of the issues that we see most frequently in terms of the motivation for putting pressure on the investigator. And one of the things that we don't want to lose sight of is the fact that in many cases, these attacks are unfair, or where we can appreciate the motivation behind the questions, the way that those questions are posed, the way that those issues are put on the table. It's done in an aggressive and in an unfair manner. And this causes anxiety. And I think it's important for us as investigators to acknowledge that sometimes there's behaviors that we deal with that do cause anxiety. Sometimes there are questions that are raised where it can cause you to lose your confidence. You may be in a situation where folks are asking questions or challenges are being brought up, and you don't know where those challenges are coming from. You are sitting there, your head is spinning, and you are confused. And it's important then to recognize just the toll that all of these behaviors, that these actions can take, or the effect that they may have on your mental health, and not to ignore that, and make sure that you are then taking steps to address those mental health issues. And we're going to get into those strategies later in the presentation. Now, knowing that these attacks may be coming your way, knowing these concerns that we've just reviewed are common in many investigations, you can begin with the end in mind. You can start your investigation with the reality that, hey, look, folks are going to be unhappy. They're either unhappy now or they may be unhappy later. And what can I do as an investigator to deal with this conflict, or deal with this conflict that may be coming my way? And the first thing that you want to do in terms of proactive steps is to create an investigation plan. So you don't want to just rush in and assume that, this investigation's come across my desk, or this issue has now escalated to an investigation. I have to do it. You want to sit down, really unpack what are the allegations that are in front of me, and do we in-house have an investigator that is qualified and able to take this on? So before you even rush into anything, you're going, straight to that issue of qualifications and experience, and seeing if you, again, have that experience in-house to do that work. And part of that analysis might also be, do we have not just a person in-house, but is that person available to do the work, given the timelines that are involved, given the number of witnesses that we need to meet with? Can we dedicate this resource to completing this investigation? And it's really wrestling with that and deciding if, again, being very honest about whether or not that experience exists in-house, and if it then wouldn't make sense to bring in an external third party to resolve the issue for you. Another part of this is how interviews are going to be conducted, and who you're going to meet with, and in what order. So in terms of those issues, and there's a whole lot more, right, that goes into an investigation plan. So this presentation today isn't meant to go over all of the elements of your investigation plan or your process setup from beginning to end. But certainly, if you do want some pointers on that, we can provide that to you. What I'm pointing out on this issue is just that if you take a step back and assess the allegations and whether or not there's the expertise in-house to deal with them, that's going to help you better address those questions before they're even posed to the investigator. Another piece of planning and another proactive step that you can take is having a communications plan. What are you going to say to folks at the outset of the interview? This goes for the complainants, the respondents, and witnesses to an investigation. Do you have your script set up? Are you prepared to address issues of confidentiality in that script? And how are you going to respond when folks ask you the question, can you guarantee that what I'm about to speak to you about that this evidence that I am going to share with you is going to be kept in strict confidence and not shared outside the confines of that meeting or conversation? How are you going to respond to that question? Being prepared for the regular communications that you are going to have with folks throughout the investigation. When are you going to update the parties? And will parties be getting a copy of the report? Yeah, a communications plan is one of those aspects of an investigation that's often overlooked. I can say when I look back over the length of my career doing this work, early on, it was common for me to just contact the parties when I needed to meet with them. And at the beginning of a process, naturally, you would meet with the complainant, and there wouldn't really be much contact with the complainant after that until you had completed the interviews, and then you're reaching out to the complainant for a follow-up to give that individual a chance to respond to evidence you've collected that contradicts what the complainant may have shared with you. So that person may be sitting there for weeks at a time before you then circle back with them. And over the course of my practice, one of the things that I've modified is providing more regular updates to the parties and not assuming that they were okay and that they were comfortable waiting for me to get back to them. Also, sometimes the assumption is made that the employer will be providing updates to the individuals, and that isn't always the case. So it's one of those things, just having a communications plan and mapping out the fact that letting the folks know, here's when you can expect to hear from me, that can go a long way to putting them at ease with the process. And also letting them know, look, after they get a copy of your conclusions, or if they're going to get a copy of the report, here's when we're going to meet, or the fact that there will be a meeting scheduled to unpack those findings at the end of this process. Another proactive step that you can take is really just owning your mistakes. When these issues come across our desk, it's important to acknowledge, I think, how these issues come across our desk, right? Oftentimes, especially for in-house HR folks, you may be managing this process from the beginning, or at some point in its evolution, and before you even got to an investigation, there were maybe complaints that had filtered up to HR, and you're managing these complaints. And maybe in hindsight, you weren't diligent in managing the complaints, or didn't respond in a timely way to them. And something that may have been rather straightforward then ballooned into something bigger because maybe one or several complainants believed that their complaints were being ignored or weren't being addressed. And then you're now dealing with this big investigation. So as you then go through the process and now you're starting to investigate the complaint, there would be a natural tendency there to try to overlook how this blew up and how this became a bigger, maybe more complicated investigation. But inevitably, from my perspective, that just leads to more problems. So you want to understand that these situations are rarely going to be perfect, that it's rare that someone looks back and says, hey, there isn't anything I would do better in hindsight, looking back on how I handled these complaints or how I managed them and attempted to resolve them. There are always lessons that we can learn, but owning up to the mistakes is going to be important, because then you can begin to fix it, right? And that's a key thing that I think many of us don't realize, is that whatever happens along this complaint stage or at any point in the investigation, it can be fixed. And you either can go back through the evidence and fix the current investigation, right, to maintain its integrity and to put things back on track. In other cases, the fix might be just hitting the restart button, and you bring in a fresh investigator and you start the process from the ground up. But I have yet to see a situation unfold where we couldn't put steps in place to address it one way or the other. So owning up to the mistakes is key. And you want to do that, again, we're talking about proactive steps here. So you want to do that even before someone catches on to it, or even before it becomes an issue for one of the parties to the investigation. If you know that there's been a misstep here or a potential mistake has been made, it's great if you identify that and then seek out help to address that issue, or at least have the conversation to figure out if this is in fact something that could cause problems down the road. So in terms of the responding to these allegations that are brought to you, you want to, again, take that proactive step, assess the allegations, and make sure that you choose the right investigator for the job. We have conducted other seminars where we've gone through the problems that employers have faced when they don't appoint a qualified and a competent investigator. We reviewed the case of Home Hardware and Elgert, where Home Hardware appointed an in-house HR person to conduct a sexual harassment investigation. And one of the issues with this investigator was the fact that he had never conducted a sexual harassment complaint before. So that proved to be problematic for Home Hardware, as there were then a number of missteps that this individual made going through that process. So you want to be proactive, be honest with what abilities you have to conduct the investigation, and take the right decisions from the beginning. And that way, when you're then asked, or if the investigator is asked during the interview, they're in a position to say, yes, I do have experience doing this, or here's the training that I've received. And if you don't have the experience in-house, it's great to identify that and figure out, well, why is it that we're uncomfortable maybe sending this individual to conduct this investigation? Is it an issue of training? Because that's something that can be remedied in fairly short order. So it's good to go through that process and figure out what the skill set is of your investigation team in-house. Where is it that they could use some help? And then we're happy to chat with you to identify the resources and the training that you need to bring these investigators up to the level that you want them to be. Again, transparency is really important. We, beyond just the qualifications or the experience that someone might have, you also want to be able to give assurances to the party or to the witness that this investigator doesn't have a relationship with either of the parties to the investigation. There are a number of cases, one of them being Bell Mobility and Pires Ferreira, where Bell Mobility appointed an investigator to a very serious complaint who was very good friends with the responding party, and they had worked together for more than a decade. They socialized outside of work, and naturally, the complainant took issue with that investigator's conclusions after he looked into her complaint and found that there hadn't been any impropriety on the part of the responding party. And that was ultimately something that the court in that case addressed as well, saying, look, there's no reason why in a big corporation like Bell Mobility, they couldn't have found an investigator who wasn't best friends with the responding party. So you want to avoid not just actual bias, but even the perception of bias. And so that's something that you can identify and address at the very beginning of the investigation. And that way you can provide the necessary assurance to whatever party has those concerns. You might have folks, as we identified, who are resentful or upset about the process. You might have folks who are resentful because they are innocent and hate being dragged through the process. You might have folks who are resentful because they just don't want to be held accountable. At the end of the day, you have to let them know that this is a process that must be followed, that the employer has an obligation here to maintain a workplace that's free of violence and harassment, and conducting an investigation is a key component of ensuring the employer's obligations, making sure that there hasn't been any behaviors that would violate applicable employment law policies, whether that's the Human Rights Code or a code of conduct. You want to make sure that folks at work are being treated with dignity and respect. For parties, again, that are upset, a part of this job is just giving them those assurances, right? That you are here, even though you are employed by the corporation and you're working in HR, you are coming to this work with an open mind. You're here to listen to them, and this is their opportunity to be heard. And it's just doing that job to build the relationship with them and let them know that you're here to do your job with integrity. One of the troubling things that we've seen escalate in the last couple of years is behavior that goes beyond what we've described to this point, right? So not just the difficult witness, but someone who's actually threatening health and safety, someone who may be stalking the investigator or one of the parties or other members of the corporation. And so you see people with very aggressive behavior. You have people who engage in really creepy behavior, and that is something that can't be ignored. So we had a situation where the individual that we were trying to meet with contacted my office and was asking all of these personal questions of my staff, and wanted to find out where they lived and whether they attended work every day in the office, and if not, what days did they attend work, and just things that were completely irrelevant to scheduling an interview. And when I raised this with the client that we were doing the investigation for, they also disclosed some troubling behavior on the part of this individual, where it turns out that this person may have followed senior staff to work and was sending inappropriate emails describing the route that those folks take from home to their place of work. So you have people out there who have serious issues, who may be suffering with mental health issues, but who are certainly capable of inflicting harm. And this incident made me consider, what are our protocols for dealing with this information? Do my staff have a script so they can understand where the line is between providing good customer service and being professional and respectful, into, okay, look, this has gone too far and I don't need to answer these questions. So it's something that you want to make sure that you have in-house, in terms of a protocol for staff and investigators, where you're dealing with someone who has either engaged in questionable behavior or who is posing a threat, for them to understand those protocols. There's also consultants that we have worked with who can do a threat analysis. And this is something that we see more frequently in the United States, just given the different culture there, that it's something that they're much more, employers in the US are much more attuned to than employers in Canada. But certainly if you're looking for additional information or additional resources here, please do send us an email or give us a call. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction. Another thing that you want to consider here is where you are mindful of the physical safety of your staff. Is that then a trigger to say, look, maybe based on these circumstances, we bring in an external investigator to deal with this issue, because that person is going to be better positioned to deal with the whatever safety risks might be inherent in completing the investigation. So just going back to the challenges that this poses on the mental health of investigators, again, it's that acknowledgement that investigation work can be very draining. It can be very challenging. And you want to make sure that you have the necessary supports, whether that's through an insurance benefit provider and EAP programs, or simply what I found helpful is having colleagues that I can speak to about these challenges. And sometimes when something happens, for example, you have in that situation I outlined at the beginning of the presentation where someone is coming in and just completely fabricating what happened during an investigation interview, and the director of HR is asking questions, taking that person's side and asking questions about what occurred and why did things unfold that way. It's easy to sit back and your head is spinning and you're trying to figure out what's going on here. And speaking with colleagues can help you to better unpack those issues and realize the politics that are at play, or whatever the case might be, right? There are any number of situations that can present themselves, but having that support of others in the community and not sitting there thinking, I need to deal with this on my own, that reaching out to others and being part of that community is something that I found to be really helpful in terms of doing this work and problem solving and making sure that I am staying healthy in all respects. So in terms of the takeaways here, we want to make sure that you're prepared, that you realize that this work is not easy, that there will be attacks, some of them justified, some of them completely unjustified. But it's important to anticipate that this is part of the landscape of conducting investigations. So you want to, knowing that these issues and these questions might be coming your way, you want to be proactive in terms of dealing with them through the steps that we've outlined here today. You want to be prepared and make sure that you've got a proper investigation plan and you follow that to completion. And no matter what happens on the back end of it, you're going to have folks who are happy, you'll have folks who are unhappy, and you'll have challenges to the conclusions for a variety of reasons. But if you follow a process and you stay within a proper investigation framework, at the end of the day, it's important to realize that a court is not expecting you to be 100% correct. The standard here is not perfection. It is getting this right on a balance of probabilities. Did you follow an acceptable process? Did you make reasonable decisions along the way? And did you reach a conclusion that's supported by the evidence on a balance of probabilities? Meaning, is it 50% plus one, right? Is it more likely or not that something happened in the way that it was described? So you follow those steps, and your work will stand for itself. And at any point along the way during the process or on the back end, make sure you get advice, whether that's advice internally or externally. We're happy to help people game plan through an investigation or troubleshoot issues during an investigation. Reach out for support. And it's not unusual for there to be anxious moments at various points in time. And so if you're having that, reach out and get the support that you need, as opposed to glossing over it and just hoping that it won't become an issue. Okay, so I'm happy to, with that, take your questions.
Hey, Doran. So we've got a question from Manav. What level of evidence needs to be provided to both parties?
So at the beginning of an investigation, you want to make sure that you met with the complainant and they're giving you information. They're saying, essentially, here's what happened to me. And you want to get that information in enough detail so that you understand the allegations. You're then taking all that information from the complainant and putting that into what we call particulars of complaints. There may be 10 things that the complainant has said, look, these are, the incidents that I experienced. So there's 10 allegations, and you want to put that into sufficient detail so that the responding party can meet with you and give a fulsome response. So they need to know what happened, and where did this happen, and approximately when did this happen, and enough detail essentially so that they can come into a meeting and say, yeah, it's not just this person said something negative to me and I think it's harassing. You want to say, on at such and such a meeting, in the summer of 2024, we had a team meeting, and this person, here's what they said to me, right? These are their words, to the best of my recollection, and here's who was present. And that gives the responding party then an opportunity to say, okay, yeah, I do remember that meeting, and here's my version of events in terms of what happened. So at the end of the day, you want to give enough detail to the responding party so that they can show up to the interview and be able to give a full account in terms of what happened with respect to that allegation.
Okay. And another we got in by email before the presentation is there what are the criteria that you use to decide when to get the authorities involved in an aggressive response from a complainant?
So that's really going to come down to the threat of violence, right, and the credibility of a threat. You might have someone who makes a comment about, like, you guys are going to pay for this, right? Meaning, let's just say the example is a responding party, and these allegations then are brought forward, and maybe the responding party gets a sense that things are not going their way, and they're like, you know what, to the extent that this person made the complaint, or maybe the investigator is there pursuing it and accepting the allegations, that he just makes the comment, look, you guys are gonna pay for this. Well, there isn't that threat in there of physical violence or something very overt or explicit in there that the authorities, the police can really take action on in that moment. There isn't the threat of an imminent crime being committed, but certainly it would be something that you would take note of, and you want to and you would mention it. Hey, look, this threat was made. But I think you're looking for something more specific or more definite than that, where someone's saying, hey, look, if I lose my job, there's going to be consequences here. And, if I'm gone, other people are going to be gone too. Well, what does that mean, right? And a lot of this is contextual, right? If you make that comment, at a at a workplace in the United States, where maybe in that city or in that state there's already been some examples of gun violence, then that comment is going to take on a whole different meaning for folks in that context than it would in a different context, right, where they have a very different culture. So that discretion in terms of when to bring in the authorities, or it's not so much when to bring in the authorities, but it's more, are the authorities going to do something about it when you do file a complaint? I think anytime you subjectively feel that you are being threatened with physical violence, that would be something that you definitely want to alert the authorities to, and then it's definitely a situation where you might then want to bring in a consultant where they can do a risk assessment in that situation to figure out what is the threat of harm or actual harm. And then the authorities are brought in, and they'll have their own framework that they will apply to determine at what point do they then take steps to address the situation. They might come in on something that's on the lower end of the scale. And I've had cases where the police department would have a word with the party that made the comment to make them aware that this is something that potentially crosses into a criminal liability here, and just let the person be aware that the police are live to their situation, and this isn't behavior that is being ignored. And that is often, in my experience, has been an effective deterrent to deterring that behavior from escalating. But a lot of this really comes down to a judgment call, and I would say it wouldn't be something. This isn't normal, right? That you would get threats regarding your physical safety. So anytime that there is that threat, then you want to escalate it. Maybe bring it to the attention of the relevant authorities, but then also consider having a consultant come in to do a risk assessment, so that internally, even if this doesn't cross into a situation that the police are going to pursue, at least from the employer's perspective, you can take the steps you need to protect your staff.
Okay, so there are a couple more questions here. First is, do you have a preference of recording interviews or not?
This really changed for me during the pandemic. Before the pandemic, all of my interviews were in person, and I typed out my notes and had in-person interviews, and often I'd have an associate with me attending those interviews. During the pandemic, the whole world gravitated to video interviews, and in that forum, it became much easier to record the interview. So that's how we do it now. It's just a part of our standard practice to record the interviews, again, mainly because the vast majority of them are conducted via video conference, and that way we still have our notes. I'm still making notes as we go through, but we also have a transcript from the actual recording. Got it.
Okay, so if there is a perceived bias, but you are the only one available to investigate a concern, how would you recommend navigating that? And as the investigator, I'm confident I could provide objective support, but I'm more concerned with perceived bias.
And that's a fair concern, because again, going back to the case law, and there's a number of cases, but the one I'll reference is Bell Mobility and Pires Ferreira. What the court said is that there are important rights at stake in an interview or during a workplace investigation. And at the end of that process, it's possible that someone is going to lose their job. If the respondent did the things that are alleged, it's possible that one of the outcomes is that person loses their job. So given the high stakes that are involved, you as an employer, you're implementing a process that is free of actual bias, but also free from the perception of bias. And certainly if you've identified from the outset that, look, that there is a real question here. It's not somebody just kind of blindly throwing out, look, that there could be bias here. You identify that there is a real issue here in terms of that perception that this individual is not getting a fair shake. Then it's wise to bring in an external third party to conduct that investigation, because ultimately, as the employer, you don't want the investigation to be tainted by the perception of bias. You want to get to the heart of the matter. You want to understand what happened, and you then want to make a decision to address the situation and then move on. So the last thing you need is to conduct an investigation, spend all of that time and energy, then have the investigation be questioned because there's the perception of bias, and then where does that leave you? Right? You then have to bring in an external third party anyway to fix the situation and arrive at a conclusion that the parties can live with, or one that at least is that can stand up in court. So I would say if you identify that as an issue from the outset, even though you have the expertise and the capability to do it, it's going to save you time and money and help advance your goals if you just bring in a third party.
Okay. Another question is, how do you deal with parties to the interview asking for a copy of the recording?
What I typically do is prepare a transcript after the interview, and I would meet with them to review their evidence. So the recording is helpful in terms of helping to prepare that transcript, but the individual, we still have another video conference, and they can see the notes that I took, and they're able to then, within reason, make any corrections to those notes if they feel that something is misstated there.
Okay. Are there any more questions? You can put them into chat or into the Q&A. I think that is all of them, Dorian.
Yeah, I don't see any more coming through. So that's wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for your participation today. It was a pleasure spending this time with you and going through these issues, and want to encourage you in terms of doing this work to continue doing it with integrity to the best of your ability. And if you need any support along the way, whether that is the need for additional training or assistance troubleshooting an investigation, please do give us a call and we'll be happy to walk you through those issues. Thanks, everyone. Take care.